All righty, so where we were picking up at is roughly where we left off last week. We had talked some about the classical proofs, and the classical proofs, kind of an overview of the various ways of reasoning. And some of this has to do with reasoning, and we'll see as we go through this. Some of it, though, is more based within science itself, and we'll see that as we get on to the teleological argument and so forth. But so we're picking up tonight with the cosmology or cosmological argument. Now, if you have your book there, if you have your lesson in front of you, the cosmological argument addresses the fact that the universe or the cosmos is here and therefore must be explained in some fashion. It's like anything else that you see. And man always likes to ask these questions. Think about archaeology. Well, how did that get here? Who put that here? Who did that? I mean, think about when you're a parent raising children, number one question in the house has always been, who did that? You know, and it's either one of the kids or the dad blaming the kids or not me. You know, there's always that question, who did it? How did they do it? How did it come to be? That's what has driven science throughout the centuries. The unknown and wanting to know, how did something get here? How did it become? And so with the idea of the cosmological argument is that there is a demand to know that since it is in existence, that it had to have an origin, that the universe had to begin somewhere. Now you'll see a definition on the screen behind me there. The cosmology is a branch of metaphysics that deals with the universe as an orderly system, a theory or doctrine describing the natural order of the universe. When you look within the universe itself, and you can even come down to the smallest of particles here on the earth, do you see order? You do. You see extreme order. As far as we know, as science has studied, there are certain things that just cannot be broken unless you interfere with the process. Even the way that airplanes fly. Airplanes flying has nothing to do with magic or nothing. It's all about physics. It's all about science that is in place. So it's a very orderly system. If it was a disorderly system, then we could not do the things that we do. We could not build the things that we build because there would not be any certainty and guarantee to it. The second definition is a branch of astronomy, not astrology, but astronomy that deals with the origin, structure, and space-time relationships of the universe, a theory dealing with these matters. There's a lot out there to study. I mean, you think about, and this is what I find interesting. You think about mathematics. Who found mathematics incredibly boring in school? I did when the teacher didn't accept my way of doing it, you know. But the more you study things, the more you find mathematics in everything. I mean, you think about the rotation of the earth around the sun, the orbit, or the rotation of the earth, the orbit of the earth around the sun, the orbit of the moon around the earth. And to show the level of consistency using mathematics, they can show what moon would have been in the sky 300 years ago, 3,000 years ago, because of the consistency there. There's a constant. They can track, think about comets. They can tell you this such and such comet's going to be flying through in about 3 months. Well, how do they know that? Because there's a consistency to it. Now, when I was a kid, I read a book that was explaining Planet X. At the time, it was an old book too. It was about Pluto. Now, I know they threw away Pluto a couple of years ago, and I think they're trying to bring it back as a planet. But anyway, it had not been seen with the telescope of the visible eye. But one of the other nearby planets had a weird movement in its orbit. And so science, mathematics, said there had to be a body out there that was affecting the orbit of the planet. And lo and behold, what did they find? A planet out there. So the point is, this is not coming from a universe that is full of disorder. There's order and structure within this universe. And so therefore, since it is here, since we have such order, the desire there is to understand it. The desire here is to be able to give the answer to the question, where did this come from? Why is it here? The universe, all right, now here's the cosmological argument. Let's kind of continue talking about this. Fact number one, the universe exists and is real. Can't deny that unless you're a Christian scientist. Christian scientists believe that everything around us is but an illusion, that our spirit is one spirit with God, but we are flawed. And our flaw is we think we live in a physical world. Some point when we come to a complete realization of all things, then we'll be one with God. That's why they don't go to the doctors. That's why even saying, I've got a cold and taking medicine is something that is sinful to them. Okay? Setting that type of belief aside, most individual believes that we live in a real world, universe, and so forth. The thing about it is, you'll see on the chart behind me, that the atheists, the agnostics there, they not only acknowledge its existence, but they admit that it is a grand effect. It is something that is tremendous. I mean, so we're not talking about something that is easily denied, because they look around and they have to acknowledge that it is there. And if an entity cannot account for its own being, all right, in other words, then it is said to be contingent, because it is dependent upon something outside of itself to explain its existence. So what did I just say, Hunter? Can you explain that in simpler terms? What's that? That's right. I wasn't picking on you. Just really need some help there. Yeah. That's the idea there, okay? It's here, and it's here because it had to be created by somebody. It's contingent upon something or another being there before it. And this is the way our lives are. Has there ever been a point within your life where something has just appeared out of nothing and you weren't curious as to where it came from? Everything comes from something. It's just a common, real simple process. And so it is this idea that there's a contingency there, something that it brings about. And so they introduce this idea of the law of cause and effect, which states that every material effect must have an adequate and antecedent cause. All right? Cause and effect. What would be a good example of cause and effect? Remember when I fell many years ago? What was the cause? I wasn't paying attention, stumbled. What was the effect? I landed flat on the ground. Okay? Cause and effect. If you do something here, it's going to affect something over there. If you inadvertently leave your water turned on in the kitchen and the plug is in the sink, what effect is that going to ultimately have? You'll flood the kitchen, you know. Is the kitchen going to flood all by itself? Not normally. No, not normally. So it is the idea of cause and effect. So if the universe is here, then the question must be, how did the universe get here? Cosmological argument says it is here, and it had to have been created by something or someone, because it's not going to be out of nothing. There is something that I came across called a vertical particle, and some people try to use this to show that you can have something out of nothing. But a vertical particle comes down to the quantum level, and it has to do with this tiny particle that phases in and out, seemingly of existence. It's a really weird thing that's proven by math and it's supposedly been proven in experiments. But even that doesn't support the idea of something from nothing, because it's already there. It's just different. It's a different existence that we haven't yet, with our science, been able to fully understand. Cause and effect. What is Hebrews chapter 3, verse 4 have to say? Let's turn over there for a moment. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 4. Notice in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 4, for every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. All right? Does that support the idea of cause and effect? Sure, yeah. Give me an example of a house that was not built by man. This is a trick question, and I'm not talking about the church or the house of God. How about a cave? Den in a mountain, a cave, and so forth. All right, so someone goes and finds a living place there. But all the houses in Edmond, Oklahoma, over the last 11 years, the growth northward has just exploded. Did any of those houses come into existence without someone building it? And the answer, of course, is no. Okay. And so here in Hebrews 3, verse 4, for every house is built by someone. But who has built all things? God, okay? It comes back to this again. It's here. It exists. And either the universe was established by someone or the universe came out of nothing. And our science itself doesn't support the idea of something coming from nothing. You'll notice on the chart, look at the about halfway down. In like manner, all things, the cosmos, is an effect and was built by or caused by God. Even children can understand this concept. All right, any thoughts? Any comments on that? All right, let's burrow down a little bit deeper here into this idea. So here's the big question. What caused the universe? Now, there are a number of world religions that have their own account of creation, if you would, their own account of things that are very parallel with the Bible. And what happens is, people who don't understand the Scriptures, they will view the Bible as any other document by some religious belief. And some people will try to get you to understand that the story of Noah was actually written in the Bible while the children of Israel were in Babylon, after they learned about the story of Gilgamesh. And that's how they kind of dispute and discount the Bible. The problem is, if we approach it from the standpoint that the Bible is the Word of God, then it makes sense that there would be a number of religions that have similar accounts, because it all came from where? It all came from God. And throughout the ages upon ages that man has lived, and God has let man live here on this earth, they're going to talk about it. You think about the Tower of Babel. Here they are at the Tower of Babel. The people at the Tower of Babel were all descended from whom? Noah and his family. Okay? So we don't know the full length of time, and we have some genealogies in the Scriptures, but they would have known the story of how things began. They would have known the oral traditions that had been passed down. So when God confounded their language and they all spread out, guess what they all carried with them? The oral traditions of how things began. And without someone there, like the Hebrews would ultimately have, to keep it on the truth, where the facts were there, through the course of time, like the telephone game, what they would carry would begin to change and alter and begin to develop into other things. But the point is, it all came from somewhere. And to say that it came from nothing, like I said, just defies our understanding. So there's three possible answers to what caused the universe. First one is the universe is eternal. That was an idea that was put forth some years ago. And it says it has always existed and will always exist. Well, that's first option, okay? So where the universe came from, or where did it come from? It's always been here, okay? Second one, the universe is not eternal. Rather, it created itself out of nothing. That's the third argument we're looking at. The third is the universe is not eternal and did not create itself out of nothing. Rather, it was created by something or someone anterior and superior to itself. Now, of the three options, considering the question, these three options are the only options, aren't they? Effectively, okay? Either they're made by somebody, or it made itself, or it has always been. Well, scientists have ruled some of these things out. The first alternative was proposed years ago. That is the idea of the universe being eternal. It's called a steady state theory. And it suggested that at points in space, hydrogen was coming into existence from nothing. Let's don't look at that one yet. I guess it does, yeah. So this was eventually discounted and rejected because of the first law of thermodynamics. So we're going to throw away the idea that the universe is eternal, because that, as we said a while ago, violates the laws of science that we understand. And it was eventually discounted, the book says, and rejected because of the first law of thermodynamics: neither matter nor energy may be created or destroyed in nature. What does that mean, Daniel? The third, the law of dynamics we just looked at there, the first law. Exactly. You can't get something from nothing. Matter is neither created nor destroyed. It is always present. And that's been proven by science. I mean, that's a scientific principle. It's the law of thermodynamics. We understand that. So you cannot adopt a policy or a belief regarding the universe that then contradicts the very laws within the universe itself. Others who advocate an eternal universe encountered another problem. It violated the second law of thermodynamics. As energy is employed to perform work, it is transformed from a usable to a non-usable form. Okay? Someone want to explain that one? Take the gas in your car. Once you drive your car a couple miles, can you recreate that gas that it's burned? No. The energy has been used. It's still in existence. It's not destroyed. It's converted to a different form. All right. So you cannot, as the second law of thermodynamics states, as energy is employed to perform work, it is transformed from a usable to non-usable form. All right. So then, as Dr. Robert Jastrow stated, the universe is running down like a clock. If it is running down, there must have been a time when it was fully wound up. The universe is running down because energy is becoming less available for use. Now, keep in mind, what I just said involves a lot of mathematics. That's kind of how they draw these conclusions. But there are some observations that they're able to make with scientific equipment and so forth and so on. So why don't we rule out the eternal universe concept? The second alternative, the universe created itself, has, of course, been reported by some. Just go on to the next chart there. The thing is, there's no known process whereby matter could fashion itself from nothing. Surely, if this was a doable concept, our science, with as far as we've come, would have been able to figure it out. We just can't. It would be like, well, what are the odds of you walking into your house and a cell phone appearing on the table out of nowhere? Not going to happen. Unless what happens? Someone builds it, buys it, gives it to you, puts it on the table. All right, but it's not going to come from nothing. And this is the secondary idea. And so, yet there is no known process, as we said, where this could happen. From nothing comes nothing. For a time in the 1980s, the inflationary model was proposed, and the idea of the universe evolving from nothing was speculated. Prominent scientists such as Stephen Hawking eventually dismissed the idea. Which law of thermodynamics would this idea violate? Well, it's the first law. Neither matter nor energy may be created or destroyed in nature. See, this is what people don't always understand. As far as Christians go in the Bible, we're not opposed to science whatsoever, especially science that can be proven with empirical evidence. The Bible doesn't dispute any of that. Matter of fact, we stand behind everything that science has proven. The problem is when we begin to create theories that they in and of themselves begin to violate scientific principles. And that's what we're getting into. And so someone would say, but how does that help me in my understanding about the Bible? Well, it's like this. If you rule out the fallacies that men have embraced, you got to look for some other answer. And then when you begin to weigh the answers found within the Bible, then you begin to say one is more reasonable than the other, and you choose the greater evidence in that case in point. Any thoughts or any comments about this? Jared. Observation doesn't always give you the right information. What Jared, if you didn't hear what he's talking about, there was a time that you would say, now listen, don't leave that raw meat setting out because it'll generate flies. And people thought that from that meat would spontaneously become house flies. Well, we know exactly what happened. Flies would come into the meat, lay the eggs, and then the maggots and the whole icky stuff, and there you have flies. Until it was proven otherwise. What about bleeding? For the longest time, they thought that a disease was something that infested the blood, and if you bled an individual, it would get the disease out of them. Wasn't it? Yeah. Life being in the blood? Yeah. George Washington, they used the bloodletting on him. It was pneumonia, if memory serves correctly, And they went 3 times, if memory serves, and that was it. But that was the treatment of the day, you know. So observation isn't always as accurate as what we think until we finally have scientific principles behind it, or, in this case, what we're about to look at, what the Word of God has to say. Any other thoughts? You got one, Dan? You really look like you do. Okay. It makes sense. You got sharp enough tools to cut hair. You got sharp enough tools to let a little blood out. You know, I mean, it just... But no, you're right. That's what the barber pole originally had represented there. So let's continue, though. So here's where we're at. Third option. Was the universe created? If it didn't create itself, and if it's not eternal, those are the 2 things that we have ruled out. Then the universe was created or caused by A, something that existed before it did, B, something superior to it, or C, something of a different nature, since the finite dependent universe of matter is unable to explain itself. So nothing comes from nothing. We consider that statement there. There's only one other option. Somebody had to make the universe. Something had to create the universe. What was that something? 2 choices. Well, that which is in mind, that which is material, but the idea of the material being eternal has been dismissed, and so the only conclusion is mind or spirit being that which is eternal, and that, of course, presents us with God. See, here's the point, is the universe is physically based. We understand all that. It's a simple concept. But if the universe is physically based, and the physical universe was created by something, it would not have been created by anything physical, correct? Because if the physical universe wasn't here, there's no one physical there to create it. So it had to be someone who, it was outside of the realm of being physical. The Bible presents the idea of it being spiritual, okay? To me, the way I've kind of come to accept this through the years is the illustration of a giant Tupperware bowl, okay? And so we have the eternal Heavenly Father decides to create not just the earth, but what? The heavens and the earth. So all things physical are put in this Tupperware bowl. And so in this Tupperware bowl, you've got the planets, the solar systems, the galaxies, and so forth and so on. And life is going on, is created by God. And then one day, He's going to empty that out. All things physical will be destroyed. And so what will be left when all things physical are destroyed? Well, that which created all things physical be spirit. What did I say? The Tupperware bowl. It'll be washed and cleansed and put back up on the shelf. But you see the point, though. I mean, if that which is physical wasn't created by that which is physical, it had to be created by something else. And whatever was created by had to be something not physical, but in this case, spiritual. And that has to be God. I mean, there is, from our level of comprehension and understanding and the evidences of the options out there, there's nothing better than what we're looking at here. Any thoughts or any comments? Let's go to Dan. It won't. I mean, that's our understanding of it. Whatever God created in the beginning, the way Peter paints the picture, all that will be destroyed in the end. Yeah, you think about that. So it's, you know. Any other thoughts? All right, so then let's look at the next one. Edward Thompson says the following. And by the way, these quotes, they're in the material. You'll see it footnoted. You look at the index there at the end of each chapter. Tells you where this is coming from and the materials and so forth. The doctrine of the one living and true God, creator, preserver, and benefactor of the universe, as it solves so many problems, resolves so many doubts, banishes so many fears, inspires so many hopes, gives such sublimity to all things, and such spring to all noble powers, we might presume would, as soon as it was announced, be received by every healthy human mind. In other words, you think that it would be easier for people to believe in God than to not believe in God. And throughout history, and I don't know how accurate, I'm going to make a statement, I couldn't prove it, but from what I've heard throughout the years, it seems like the majority of history has always believed in some sort of deity. It's not until maybe within the last 200 years that we've really developed this concept of no deity whatsoever. Any thoughts or comments about this? Let's see. Truly, Psalms 14, verse 1, in considering all things that we look at, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And understand something. This is not intended, David's statement there is not intended as an insult, the way that today we might throw the insult around as a fool. It is the idea of one who makes a decision that is not wise. It is one who chooses a path that is going to end up not bettering him, but something that is going to be harmful to him. It's the path of the wise versus the path of the fool. And it is the foolish mindset that looks around the creation and says within his heart, there is no God. And so, all right, any thoughts, any comments about that? All right, were you able to load up that third set of charts there, Connor? I know he's busy taking counts. I interrupted him there. Don't leave off where we're counting. I'll start all over again. All right, the next one we continue talking about the existence or the evidences for the existence of God. And the author here starts with an example, and we're going to look at that here in just a moment. And let me do what I asked him to do as well. And there it is. Still not loading up yet? I was trying to. Okay. These PowerPoints were created from PDF files, so which means every page is a giant picture, which means, well, they're just big files. And so it takes a couple minutes for it to load in. But let's go ahead while we're looking at that. Let's move on over. The author here put this lesson together. Uses an example of young Joey and his granddad where they're lying in the lush grass of the backyard one day. They were studying the clouds, and they looked up and they saw a flock of ducks flying overhead. If you ever looked at ducks flying overhead, what formation do they fly in, or in what formation do they fly? V. Okay, these smart birds. They already know one letter of the alphabet. If they'd get their act together, they'd have A. Just put a couple birds there in the middle. Okay. And so it would be a very good question. How come the birds fly like that? It wasn't until we began to understand science that we began to understand why the birds would instinctively fly in a V formation. Who knows the answer to that question? Go ahead, Dan. Mm-hmm. He's not making these words up. These are real words. Keep going.
And as the leaf flies, he's taking all of the drag of the atmosphere, and the rest of them fall in behind him, and it's easier to fly. And when he gets tired, another one goes up front and leads for a while. And that's why it's in V's, because of the cause and effect.
That's right. And it probably wasn't until we began to understand the way the airflow works that we began to understand. It was probably looking at these animals and wondering why are they doing this, that helped to lead the way to that understanding there. So we talked about order. This is not done by happenstance. It's not some accidental thing that began to evolve through the course of time, you know. If it was the course of evolution, maybe it would have been some other pattern, but there is a reason created by God. And so this brings us to our teleological argument there. Teleological arguments exhibiting or relating to design or purpose, especially in nature. All right, think about that again. Exhibiting or relating to design or purpose, especially in nature. Focus on design, I think, would be a good word to focus on. And then, of course, purpose, or as was proposed. So here's the argument. If the universe evinces purposeful design, there must have been a what? Designer, yeah. The universe does evince purposeful design. Thus, the universe must have a designer. In other words, when you look at this, there's evidence that this had to have been designed. I mean, the alternative is that over the course of time, it eventually evolved in this way. I mean, you think about the number of ducks and flying birds that failed because they got too tired. And then finally they said, hey guys, no. To me, that's even harder to believe than what we're talking about here. There's evidence of a designer, therefore there must be a designer. Now, most people will agree with this idea. Most people understand it. All right, think about the automobile. You have an automobile, evidence that it was designed, it had to have a designer. Think about all the things that we use every day. Somebody designed them. Who was I talking to? I was trying to remember. Thought we had a conversation out in the foyer maybe Sunday or Sunday a week ago. Well, think about the aircraft. You know, airplanes that are built, Jensen. I mean, how many sub-companies have to be involved in just the building of one airplane? Yeah, hundreds of them. I mean, and we're talking about not just, hey, I get to design a plane. You know, now I get to design this little bitty box that's going to sit in this one space. It'll get this one thing done. And then inside that one, you know, it's incredible. The amount of design that must go into it, and there must be designers. And the universe is in and of itself much more complex than this. But the point of contention, though, with the atheists is whether there is evidence of design in nature adequate to draw this conclusion. It's easy to look at your car and say someone designed your car, isn't it? It's easy to look at the plane. It's easy to look at your computer. But can we look at nature itself and say, yeah, there's adequate evidence to say that it was designed by someone. So, any thoughts before we continue real quick? Go ahead, Blake. Oh, that's right. And how awesome the human body is.
Yeah, everything about the human body.
It's astounding, isn't it? I mean, and the fact that we understand how most of it works, I still think we're not fully comprehensive of how this works up here completely. But it is truly amazing that it had to me, they're in and of itself, life itself demands that we have a designer. But here we talk about our solar system. All right, and you may have some overly smart science people who may try to argue with this a little bit. But in the end, most agree with what we see here. The Earth is located at exactly the correct distance from the sun to receive the proper amount of heat and radiation to sustain life as we know it. You complain it's hot here in Oklahoma summer, but if we were a little bit closer to the sun, would it be hotter? It would be hotter. We complain that it's cold up in Alaska, but if we were farther away from the sun, would it be just that much colder? And at some point, you got a threshold to where life is no longer doable on this planet. Everything is perfect within the situation. And there's much more that we could talk about that. But we are positioned 240,000 miles from the moon. If the moon were closer by a fifth, what would happen to the tides? It'd be enormous, okay? Earth tilted on its axis at 23.5 degrees. If it were zero, much of the Earth's water would accumulate around the two poles, leaving vast deserts in its place. Atmosphere is just right for protection. If it were thinner, meteorites would cause worldwide devastation. So here's the point. Either it is true that the universe came from nothing, and we are the product of the greatest random of chances ever imagined, even to the point of the Earth orbiting at such a point at the right distance where we happen to be what's called now the Goldilocks type planets. Or we were created and intentionally designed this way. Any thoughts, any comments about that? Go ahead, Dan.
There's millions of things that we what keeps us all on this planet is gravity. You go out so many miles, and there's no longer gravity on this that we have on this earth.
You start falling under the influence of, yeah, well, yeah. But Dan, over the last several years, I've just seen evidence that gravity is getting heavier. The scale's just. But you're right, though. I mean, gravity is a great example of that. The oceans, water heat and cools. I mean, just so much has to have taken place for us to be in the perfect place for us to live. Any other thoughts? Any other comments? Okay. All right. So, argument from design. Let's go one more, and then we're almost done with our time, I think, here. So, could it be an accident? Can a person reasonably be expected to believe that these exacting requirements for life as we know it have been met just by accident? And that's what many people believe. That literally everything that we just said was by random chance, and therefore we are truly the product of an accident, and from chaos we now have this great order. Earth is exactly the right distance from the sun, right distance from the moon, the right diameter, atmospheric pressure, the right tilt, the right amount of oceanic water, the right weight and mass, and so on and so on. Is it reasonable that this was all accidental? Okay. Some people say yeah. Some people say it is very reasonable. They still can't answer the question who started it all and where did it all come from. But they ignored that and some, yes, it's all very reasonable that it could be accidental. But the British evolutionist, Sir Fred Hoyle, has stressed the insurmountable problems with this type of thinking. The chance that higher forms have emerged in this way is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials therein. I think I may have said last week when I was a kid, I heard a preacher say it'd be the equivalent of a printing press blowing up and all the letters falling down to form a phone book. He says the probability of life originating at random is so utterly minuscule as to make the random concept absurd. It becomes sensible to think that the favorable properties of physics on which life depends are in every aspect deliberate. It is therefore almost inevitable that our own measure of intelligence must reflect in a valid way the higher intelligences, even to the extreme realized. All right, any thoughts or any comments about that? Oh, I didn't finish. Even to the extreme realized. Idealized, sorry, I said that wrong, definitely. Even to the extreme idealized limit of God. I guess to cut that off on, I just didn't read it. Okay, any thoughts or comments about that? It's one of those cases where they do admit, yeah, they don't know all the answers. And they can't provide all the answers. But for whatever reason, the idea of an all-knowing, powerful, intelligent, eternal God is more absurd than to say that this all came about by accident. Any thoughts, any comments? I appreciate your patience through this. We'll get to the remainder of the arguments next Wednesday, Lord willing, and then we begin to get into evidences for the Bible as God's Word. And that will really be, we're going to start now getting back to the Bible, if that makes sense. We're getting away from external evidences. Now we're going to start getting into why we should believe it to be the Word of God and the evidences and so forth of that. I appreciate all your participation and comments.